Hey, my name's Trevor and welcome to my channel, Airbnb Max Profit. Really appreciate you tuning in. I hope you enjoy the content. I'm gonna show you how to manage your nightly rate so that you're always advertising and charging the highest dollar amount you possibly can. What is the highest number that you can advertise, the highest nightly rate you can advertise for your property and still book? We're always trying to answer that question, and I'm gonna show you the theory and the practice, but first, let's dive into some key terms that you have to understand before we can really dive into that part. All right, so market penetration index and RAM, MPI and RAM. Those are two key terms that you have to understand. These are two terms that we use to determine our nightly rates, all right? So market penetration index is the multiplier that you apply to the market to get to your revenue, looking back any particular month. So if we look back last month and the market did 50% occupancy on average, and you did 50% occupancy, your MPI is 1. If you multiply the market by 1, you get your occupancy, all right? If the market is 50% and you're 75%, your MPI is 1.5. 1.5 times 50 is 75%, all right? So you generally want to be higher than the market, but not too high. We'll dive into that in a bit. Second key term you got to understand is RAM, revenue against market. It's a multiplier just like MPI, it is an index. The market, if your set of competitors in your market did $5,000 on average in revenue for a month, and you also did 5,000 that month, your RAM is 1. If they did 5,000 and you did 10,000, your RAM is 2. We want to make RAM as high as possible. What is the highest that it can possibly be? What is the extent that you beat the market? I don't know of a better way to measure yourself, so that is what we use. And before we dive into the practice and into the math of how we arrive at the highest possible RAM your property is capable of, which is what we're going to identify. First, let's touch on the key success factors for revenue that you earn on your property, all right? The number one thing you can do is pricing management. Why is that? Because this has been studied by a few large organizations. I've done the math myself. It's pretty obvious that 50% of your revenue comes from just how you manage your nightly rates, how you manage your pricing, okay? The other 50% is a smorgasbord of things, including how big is the house, how many bedrooms do you have, how many bathrooms do you have a pool, do you have games, how good is the photography, et cetera, the list goes on. But all of that is half of the equation, and then this one thing, how well you manage your nightly rates, is half of where your revenue is going to come from. So let's dive in to how we maximize that part of it. Imagine if you can consistently double or triple the revenue that your competitors on Airbnb are earning, all right? That's what I'm gonna show you how to do. That is what we strive to do. We use RAM, revenue against the market, as our measure of how well we're doing with our properties, myself and my partners. This is the metric we look at. Yeah, we want the number of absolute revenue to be as high as possible, right? Like, how much are you making every night? I get that question a lot. And the answer is always as much as possible. And a more specific answer is, to the greatest extent that I can beat the market, right? That is my definition of maximizing revenue, the extent to which you beat the market. Now, what we have found is that if we're to put RAM and MPI on an XY axis, we get something like this, all right? If you have 0 market penetration, you have 0 occupancy, you also have 0 revenue, right? But if you have 1 or 1.2, right? MPI, you have a corresponding RAM, in this case about 1.8, right? Then you have some other MPI and RAM correlation, and then another one, okay? And what you get, right, now you see as we move further to the right, as MPI moves further to the right, your revenue against the market actually goes down. And this is generally true. And what you have is basically a downward opening parabola in most cases, okay? And so the RAM, the highest RAM you can achieve is right here at the peak of this parabola, right? So that is the more refined definition of max revenue. It's the peak of your parabola, your RAM MPI parabola, all right? So what does this mean? This means that if we can consistently get occupancy at 2.1 times the market, then we should consistently achieve the highest revenue we possibly can. All right. A couple other points. To the left of this point, we assume that, like we take these 2 points, right? Revenue is the same. But in this case, you achieved the same amount of revenue with less occupancy, i.e. less usage of the house, i.e. less expenses, less operational expenses because the house was used less. So we don't really ever want to go to the right of that peak. And it's not certain to us yet that this is the highest net operating income. It might be somewhere right here, but this is the highest revenue that I think you can earn, all right? Is right at the top of this parabola. And so back to my point, if we can consistently get a 2.1 MPI, market penetration index, if we can consistently be 2.1 times more occupied than the market, then we should consistently achieve the highest revenue that we're capable of. And the thing about occupancy is that it is the easiest thing to control, right? There's a lot of things in this business that are really out of our control. But occupancy, we can have 0 occupancy, charge too much. We can have 100% occupancy, charge too little. And we can have any number in between that we want with pricing management. So when we manage our pricing, we are managing to a target of MPI, all right? Because again, that's the number one thing. It's the most in our control with pricing. It is the thing that we can control with pricing. And so now let's dive into the practice a little bit deeper of how we do this. Okay, so we touched on the theory of the RAM MPI parabola, but in practice, this is what a scatter plot normally looks like. When you're looking back, it's called 4 months, at what your RAM MPI scatter was, it usually looks like this, right? And this obviously does not look like a parabola. It's probably something like this. Okay? And we want to know, what is the MPI at this peak point of RAM? All right? What I just drew here is called a parabola of best fit, right? You might be looking at this and be like, you skipped a bunch of dots, right? There's no clear connecting line between all of them. You're right, there isn't. But there is a parabola that fits most properly in between all of these. And by parabola of best fit, if we're going to go down this rabbit hole, let's go just a little bit deeper. I mean, there is some certain distance between this point and this line, as well as this point, and this point, right? And if you add all of those up, the total sum distance between this line and all these dots, we want to make that total sum as low as possible. All right? That is a line of best fit, or in this case, a parabola of best fit. The parabola that reduces the distance between all the points to the minimum extent possible. All right? And is still a parabola. We don't need to get in the definition of parabola. It's a hill on a graph. All right? So what is our hill of best fit? What is our parabola of best fit? If we can figure that out, then we can get this number here, and then we can manipulate our pricing looking forward against the market, right? If we see the market in some particular month, 3 months ahead, is already, 15% occupied, right? And we know that our MPI, and this is a big number, right? MPIs aren't normally this large, target MPIs, but in this case, in this hypothetical situation, is 2.3, okay? So if the market looking forward is at 10% in some period of time out in the future, we want to be 23% occupied during that time. We're at 15%. We need to lower prices. We're at 30%. Raise them. It's largely that simple. There are other levers that we pull. If I'm being honest, this isn't the only thing we look at, but this is a huge thing, and this is our target. So we're going to go to the computer now. I'm going to actually show you the math to take a 4+ series of RAM MPI relations looking back, and to turn that into parabola of best fit. We're going to go through the math, and then we're going to identify your target MPI for your property. I'm going to show you how to do it.